It was a calm evening, the kind where the sun's golden light casts long shadows across the street and the world seems to slow down, allowing people to catch their breath. But for one elderly woman, that peaceful feeling would soon be shattered. In a quiet neighborhood, tucked away from the hustle and bustle, she had no idea that danger was quietly approaching her doorstep. She wasn't alone, though. Beside her, laying calmly on the couch, was a dog. Not just any dog, but one with a history that would soon prove invaluable. This dog wasn't your typical companion. She was a retired police officer, trained to respond to danger in a split second. But for now, she was enjoying the serenity of retirement, her paws resting on the worn carpet, her eyes half closed as the evening unfolded. As the streetlights flickered to life and the quietness of the evening enveloped the neighborhood, four men silently moved into position. They had no idea what they were about to face. Their plan was simple: break into an elderly woman's home, take whatever they could find, and leave without a trace. They figured she would be an easy target, an elderly woman living alone, with no one to protect her. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first sign of trouble came when the men reached her front door. The dog, who had been peacefully napping just moments before, suddenly stood up, her ears perked, eyes wide open. She sensed something wasn't right. The woman, sitting in her favorite armchair, glanced down at her dog, her eyes filled with a comforting warmth. She didn't know what was happening outside, but she trusted this dog more than anyone else in the world. The dog let out a low growl, a sound that only a trained police dog would make when danger was near. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper, but it grew louder as the men crept closer to the door. The elderly woman's heart began to race. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure: her dog was not one to growl without reason. Without warning, the front door burst open. The robbers charged in, thinking they had the upper hand, but they had no idea who or what was waiting for them. The dog sprang into action, her years of training kicking in. In the blink of an eye, she was in motion, her powerful body moving faster than they could react. The first robber barely had time to register what was happening before the dog lunged, teeth bared. The other men froze, shocked by the sudden aggression. The elderly woman gasped, her hands trembling as she gripped the arms of her chair. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the plan. As the dog fought back with all her might, the robbers scrambled, their confidence quickly turning to fear. They had underestimated her, and now they were trapped. With each passing second, the situation became more dangerous. The woman couldn't believe her eyes. Her dog, a retired officer, was doing what no one else could. But just when it seemed like the robbers might retreat, something unexpected happened. One of the men, with a desperate look in his eyes, pulled out a weapon. The tension in the room skyrocketed. The elderly woman's heart skipped a beat. Was this the moment everything would go horribly wrong? As the dog lunged again, a sharp shot rang out, echoing through the room. The noise sent a chill down the elderly woman's spine. Was the dog hurt? Was she okay? Time seemed to stand still as everything hung in the balance. In that terrifying moment, it wasn't just the woman's life that was at risk. It was the bond she shared with her dog, a bond that had been built on years of loyalty, trust, and courage. But as the seconds ticked by, the question remained: who would come out on top in this battle of wills? The robbers, armed and desperate, or the dog, trained for situations just like this one? The suspense was unbearable. The dog, bloodied but still standing strong, fought with every ounce of energy she had left. And the robbers? They didn't know it yet, but they were facing more than just a retired police officer. They were facing something far more dangerous: the fierce loyalty of a dog who would protect her owner at all costs. As the screen fades to black, the sound of a dog's growl still lingers in the air. What happens next? Will the robbers escape? Will the woman and her dog make it through this terrifying ordeal unscathed? The sound of the gunshot echoed through the small house, freezing the elderly woman in place. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't sure if the shot had hit the dog or if it was just a warning, but the fear coursing through her was undeniable. Her eyes locked on her loyal companion, who was now locked in a fierce battle with the robbers. The woman had always known her dog was special, but in moments like this, it became so much more. This dog, a retired police officer, had been through more than most people could ever imagine. Trained in countless situations, chases, confrontations, high-stakes moments, she had seen the worst the world had to offer and still come out on top. But this was different. This wasn't a controlled environment. This wasn't a police station or a training ground. This was her home, her sanctuary, and the stakes were higher than ever before. The robbers had no idea what they had gotten themselves into. They had thought it would be an easy score, just a frail old woman alone in her house, vulnerable and unsuspecting. They had watched her for weeks, observing her quiet routine. They knew she was home every evening, sitting in that same chair, waiting for her favorite TV shows, and of course, always accompanied by her dog. They didn't realize that this was no ordinary dog. They had underestimated everything: her strength, her speed, and her sheer determination. The man who fired the shot stood frozen for a moment, his eyes wide with shock. He had not expected the dog to react this quickly, and certainly not with such aggression. He had been trained to deal with dangerous situations, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. His fingers tightened around the trigger, but before he could think of his next move, the dog lunged again, her teeth sinking into the arm of the robber who had dared to raise the gun. He screamed in pain, but it was drowned out by the ferocious growl of the dog. The elderly woman, paralyzed with fear, watched as the struggle unfolded before her. She could see the fear in the eyes of the robbers as they realized they were outmatched. They were panicking now, scrambling to make sense of what was happening. But it was too late. The dog had already made her move. Just as the woman thought she might have a moment to catch her breath, another noise rang out. The door to the hallway creaked open. The woman's eyes flicked toward it. Had someone else entered the house? Or was there more to this break-in than she had first realized? Her mind raced, but before she could process it, the sound of footsteps came closer. They weren't the heavy, clumsy steps of the robbers. These were quiet, deliberate. A chill ran down her spine. Could it be someone else? Someone more dangerous? But then the woman realized. The sound of footsteps wasn't coming from inside the house. It was coming from the outside. Someone was approaching the front door, their presence unmistakable. Through the dim light of the hallway, she saw a figure moving past the window. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? A neighbor? A police officer? Or something? Or someone far more ominous? For a moment, she froze, her mind filled with confusion. Her instincts told her to call for help, but she didn't dare speak a word, not with the robbers still in the house and her dog engaged in a life-or-death struggle. She didn't want to risk drawing attention to herself, but at the same time, she felt completely trapped. Her thoughts raced. Who could she trust? And what was really going on? The sound of the footsteps outside grew louder, and the robbers' voices grew more frantic. One of them shouted, demanding that the dog be put down, but the dog didn't listen. She was relentless, fueled by the years of training she had undergone. She wasn't backing down. Her loyalty to the woman was stronger than any fear she might have felt. Suddenly, the door to the house burst open again, this time with far less subtlety. The robbers turned their heads in panic, not knowing what to expect. But there was no time to react. The mysterious figure outside had kicked the door open with a force that left the hinges rattling. In the doorway stood a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his eyes scanning the room with the calm precision of someone who had seen too much in his lifetime. "Step away from the dog," he ordered in a low, gravelly voice. The robbers hesitated, confusion etched across their faces. Was this a cop? Or was he part of the problem? The mysterious man stepped into the house, his eyes never leaving the robbers. His movements were deliberate, calculated. The robbers instinctively backed up, unsure of how to proceed, and their hesitation gave the dog the chance she needed to press the attack. The woman barely had time to process the appearance of the new figure before her dog moved again, forcing the robbers further into a corner. She could feel her pulse racing, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. The dog was relentless, but the robbers weren't backing down either. They were desperate, and in moments like these, desperation could lead to anything dangerous, unpredictable decisions. The mysterious man seemed to have everything under control, his eyes sharp as he studied the robbers and the dog's movements. But the elderly woman couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Who was he? Why had he appeared just when the situation seemed to reach its peak? Was he here to help? Or did he have another agenda entirely? The tension in the room grew unbearable. The dog, still locked in a fierce struggle, continued to growl, her focus unwavering. She had a job to do, and nothing was going to stop her. But the robbers, now cornered, began to look around the room, trying to find an escape route. One of them reached for a pocket, pulling out something small and shiny, but the woman couldn't see clearly enough to know what it was. Was it another weapon? Her mind was spinning, the fear threatening to take over. She had no idea how this would end. Would the dog triumph? Would the robbers escape? And what about the mysterious man? Who was he really? As the seconds ticked by, it felt like time itself had stopped. Every movement, every breath, felt heavy, filled with the weight of what could come next. The only thing that was certain was that the situation was far from over. And as the screen fades to black once more, the question lingers in the air. Who will make it out of this alive, and who will be left to pick up the pieces? The silence that followed was suffocating. The robbers and the mysterious man were locked in a tense standoff, neither side willing to make the first move. The woman, still frozen in her chair, could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, a deafening reminder of how quickly things had escalated. Her dog, her loyal protector, stood firm, her muscles taut as she prepared for whatever came next. Every nerve in the elderly woman's body screamed at her to do something, to act, but the fear rooted her to the spot. The man who had burst through the door hadn't yet made a move toward the robbers. He simply stood there, studying them with a cool detachment that sent a shiver down the woman's spine. His eyes, dark and sharp, flicked over to her once, briefly, before returning to the robbers. They seemed to take a step back, confused but calculating, sizing him up. Were they now outmatched? Or were they waiting for the right moment to strike? The robbers whispered among themselves, low voices that barely reached the woman's ears. They were talking strategy, deciding what to do with the man who had unexpectedly entered their plans. The elderly woman couldn't make out the words, but she could see the flickers of fear in their eyes, their facade of control cracking under the pressure. The uncertainty was palpable, and it made her even more afraid. Why hadn't the man taken action yet? Was he waiting for something? She couldn't understand why he was just standing there, seemingly unfazed by the chaos around him. Her dog was still ready to pounce, her body coiled like a spring, but there was no sign from the man that he would offer any help. The woman's thoughts raced. Could this be a trap? Could this man be part of the same scheme, just playing a different role? The robber with the gun took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the mysterious figure. "We don't want any trouble," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Just step aside, and we'll leave. It's not too late for everyone to walk away." The words hung in the air, but the man didn't budge. Instead, he tilted his head, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. There was something unsettling about his expression, something calculated and dangerous. The robbers flinched, their hands twitching toward their weapons. Then, as if on cue, the dog growled once more, louder this time, a deep and threatening sound that made the robbers freeze. The woman's eyes locked on the scene before her. She could feel the dog's presence, her power, and her confidence. It was as though they were communicating without words, and the woman's heart swelled with pride and relief. But it didn't erase the fear. It didn't erase the looming uncertainty. The robbers weren't backing down, and neither was the mysterious man. The atmosphere in the room thickened, each passing second stretching longer than the last. The woman's breath caught in her throat when one of the robbers, a younger man with a scruffy beard, suddenly lunged for the door, his eyes wide with panic. It was the first sign of weakness they had shown since they had entered. The man with the gun shouted at him to stop, but it was too late. The younger robber was already at the door, pulling it open in a desperate attempt to escape. But before he could make it outside, the mysterious man moved, fast, too fast for anyone to react. He lunged toward the fleeing robber with a speed that caught everyone off guard. The man grabbed the robber by the arm, twisting it behind his back with such force that the robber yelped in pain. The elderly woman gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. She had seen strength before, but this was something else entirely. The man pushed the robber back into the room with a single motion, the struggle too quick for anyone to comprehend. The other robbers, momentarily distracted, seemed to hesitate, unsure of what had just happened. They hadn't anticipated someone like him, someone who could act so decisively. The elderly woman's hands clenched the fabric of her chair. What was this man? Who was he? He wasn't a cop, that much she knew. No officer would operate with such force without saying a word. He wasn't here to rescue them. He was here for something else, something darker, and that realization sent a fresh wave of fear through her. For a moment, everything was still. The dog stopped growling, sensing the shift in the room. The robbers stood frozen, their minds racing to figure out their next move. The woman's eyes flicked from one person to another. Her dog, the mysterious man, the terrified robbers. And for the first time, she felt completely out of control. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask what was happening, but her voice caught in her throat. What could she say? She knew no one would answer her. The man had his own agenda, and the robbers were too caught up in the mess they'd created to care about her. She wasn't a part of this story. She was just caught in the middle. The robber with the gun seemed to regain some of his composure. He lifted the weapon again, pointing it at the man who had just subdued his partner. "Don't make me use this," he growled, his voice shaky but dangerous. The man didn't react. He simply stared at the robber, his expression unreadable, and that was all it took for the situation to shift again. The robber, seeing that the man wasn't intimidated, hesitated. The tension was unbearable, everyone waiting for someone else to make the next move. The dog, sensing the moment of indecision, started inching closer, her growl low and warning. Suddenly, the sound of sirens wailing in the distance sliced through the tension, like a knife through the air. The robber's eyes flicked to the window in alarm. It was the sound of the police. But would they make it in time? Would they even know what was going on inside? The mysterious man's eyes darted briefly toward the window. He seemed unfazed, as if he had already anticipated the sirens. A cold, calculating look flashed across his face. The robbers, now desperate, looked at each other, and the woman could see the panic in their eyes. They hadn't planned for this. The woman's heart raced. There was no way to predict what would happen next. The robbers, with their weapons, were cornered. The man, with his quiet confidence, was poised to strike again if necessary. And her dog, ever faithful, stood ready to protect her at all costs. But the real question still hung in the air. Who was the mysterious man? And what did he want with the robbers? The story was far from over, and the danger was only just beginning. The conflict was reaching its boiling point, and with the sirens drawing closer, the tension was about to erupt. What would be the outcome of this chaotic, life-or-death situation? Only time would tell. The sirens grew louder, each passing second stretching into what felt like an eternity. The elderly woman's mind raced, her thoughts tumbling over each other in a desperate scramble. She glanced at the mysterious man, standing so still in the middle of the room, his eyes cold and unreadable. The robbers, their confidence slipping away by the moment, exchanged nervous glances. They were cornered, and the sirens were closing in on them like a predator's trap. The dog's body was still tense, every muscle coiled with anticipation, but even she seemed to sense the shift in the air. The tension was unbearable, every breath held, every movement measured. The woman could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The robbers were starting to make decisions now, decisions driven by panic, by fear of getting caught. The man with the gun shifted, his grip tightening as he leveled the weapon toward the mysterious figure. The words caught in his throat as he searched for a way out. He had thought that the robbery would be easy, that they could just grab the woman's valuables and vanish. But now everything had gone wrong. The gun wasn't a symbol of power anymore. It was a desperate plea for control, and it wasn't working. "Back off," the robber barked, his voice trembling, the weapon shaking slightly in his hand. He wasn't sure if he was trying to intimidate the man, or if he was trying to convince himself that he still had the upper hand. "We just want to leave. No one has to get hurt." The man didn't flinch. He didn't move an inch, but his gaze never wavered from the robber. He was calm, calculating, his eyes dark and focused. The dog shifted slightly, her muscles taut, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. The woman watched, her heart pounding, trying to piece together what she was seeing. This wasn't a typical home invasion. This wasn't just about money or valuables. Something far deeper was at play. The robber with the gun was looking for a way to get out, to escape. His eyes darted toward the window, as if he were trying to figure out whether they could make a run for it before the police arrived. But the other robbers seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to trust their leader's plan or to take their chances with the man in the room. The sound of the sirens was growing more urgent, the unmistakable wail of police cars getting closer. The woman's mind was on fire with possibilities, but nothing seemed to make sense. Who was the man? Why had he intervened like this? And why, after all that had happened, wasn't he trying to escape with the others? The robber with the gun stepped forward, more agitated now. "You don't understand," he said, his voice shaking with frustration. "You think you can stand in our way? You think you're some kind of hero? You have no idea who you're messing with." The words barely left his mouth before the man's expression hardened. He took one step forward, closing the distance between him and the robber with a terrifying ease. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the tension rising like a wave that was about to crash. "Step away from the dog," the man said, his voice low and calm, but laced with a dangerous edge. There was no fear in him. It was as though he knew exactly how this would play out. For a moment, the robber hesitated. His grip on the gun faltered, and the woman saw the fear in his eyes. It was only for an instant, but it was enough to see that the man's presence was starting to break their resolve. They weren't in control anymore. They were the ones who were being hunted. Without warning, the dog growled again, louder this time, her eyes never leaving the robbers. It was a warning, clear and unambiguous. The robbers looked at each other, their panic beginning to grow. They could feel it too. The room had shifted, and they were no longer the ones holding all the cards. It was the man, the dog, and the woman locked in this desperate standoff, and the robbers were running out of time. The door to the hallway creaked again, and the woman's heart leapt into her throat. Were the police already at the door? Was this it? Would they burst in and finally put an end to the nightmare? But no, the footsteps weren't the police. They were slow, deliberate, and the hairs on the back of the woman's neck stood up as she recognized the pattern. This wasn't help. This wasn't an escape. This was something worse. The mysterious man didn't move a muscle, but his eyes flicked toward the hallway with a cold intensity. He had heard it too. The footsteps. The woman saw the change in his expression, a brief flicker of something dark, something dangerous. One of the robbers noticed the man's shift in focus and followed his gaze toward the hallway. "What is it?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman didn't have time to answer. The silence in the room shattered as the sound of something heavy hitting the floor echoed from the hallway, followed by a muffled thud. The sound of footsteps continued, growing closer. Whoever, or whatever, was coming wasn't trying to hide their presence anymore. The robbers turned, their faces pale with fear, their bodies tensed, the guns in their hands trembling as they pointed toward the doorway. They weren't just up against the man and the dog now. There was something else at play, something even more sinister. Then it happened. The door to the hallway slammed open, and the figure that stepped into the room was not what anyone had expected. The woman's breath caught in her throat. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. A tall figure, wearing a mask, his body encased in black tactical gear, stepped into the room with a calm certainty. The robbers froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a stranger. The new arrival was something else entirely, someone with a far different purpose, someone with a history, a connection to the chaos that had already unfolded. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls pressing in as the air grew thick with tension. The dog growled again, but this time it was a different sound, A warning not just to the robbers, but to the newcomer. And just as quickly as it had begun, the standoff was taken to another level. What did this new player want? What did he know about the mysterious man? And what would happen when the two forces finally collided? The answers were just out of reach, lingering like a shadow, waiting to strike at the most dangerous moment. The figure in the doorway, clad in black tactical gear, didn't speak a word. His presence was enough. The robbers, already on edge, exchanged panicked looks. Their hands gripped their weapons tighter, but there was an uncertainty now, something in the air that hadn't been there before. The woman, frozen in her chair, could hardly breathe as her eyes darted between the mysterious man and the newcomer. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, each second slipping away too quickly, and yet too slowly at the same time. The dog, standing protectively in front of her, growled again, the sound sharp and commanding. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a challenge. The man in the doorway didn't flinch. His eyes were hidden behind a mask, but there was no mistaking the confidence in his stance. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't here by accident. The woman's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. What was going on? Why were all these people here in her house at this moment? And what did the new arrival want? The tension in the room spiked as one of the robbers, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, took a step forward. His gun was still trained on the mysterious man who had been the first to intervene. "Who are you?" the robber demanded, his voice trembling but laced with hostility. "You think you could just walk in here, mess everything up, and get away with it?" The newcomer didn't respond. Instead, his eyes flicked to the side, scanning the room quickly as if he were assessing the situation. His attention moved from the robbers to the mysterious man, and for a split second, the two locked eyes. The woman couldn't see the newcomer's face, but she could feel the heat of the exchange. There was something between them, a history, a recognition. It was like a silent challenge being issued, unspoken, but as real as the gun in the robber's hand. And then, just as the woman was about to breathe again, the ground beneath her shifted. The mysterious man, with his stillness that had once felt like control, moved. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't leaving. His hand shot forward, fast as lightning, and before anyone could react, he disarmed the robber with the gun, knocking it to the floor in a single fluid motion. The room exploded into chaos. The robbers scrambled, eyes wide with shock, but the man was already 2 steps ahead. The woman watched, her heart in her throat, as he fought with a precision that was almost surgical. His movements were sharp, calculating, and yet there was something almost familiar about the way he handled the situation. He wasn't just skilled, he was something else. The dog, sensing the shift, moved to protect her owner, positioning herself between the woman and the robbers. And then it happened. The second twist, the escalation that no one saw coming. The tactical figure in the doorway shifted. With one smooth motion, he pulled a device from his belt, a small, sleek, black object that looked out of place amidst the chaos. Without warning, he activated it, and the room was instantly bathed in a blinding flash of light, followed by a loud, deafening sound, like a sonic boom, but contained, focused. The robbers stumbled back, clutching their ears, disoriented by the sudden assault on their senses. The woman gasped, covering her eyes as the light overwhelmed her vision. It felt like the world was shifting, distorting, and for a moment she lost all sense of time. The mysterious man, however, didn't falter. He didn't even seem to notice the disruption. He moved with calculated grace, disarming another robber before he could react. His focus never wavered, as if everything happening around him was part of a plan the woman couldn't comprehend. Through the haze of light and sound, the woman could just make out the newcomer's figure, still standing in the doorway. But now, something in his posture had changed. The earlier confidence was replaced with something else, something darker. The woman's gut twisted as a cold realization began to form. This man, this stranger, wasn't just another bystander. He wasn't here to help. He was here to make sure the robbery didn't fail. Her heart sank. What did this mean? Was the robbery just a distraction for something else? Was the mysterious man somehow working with the robbers? Or was he a wild card, A rogue agent with his own agenda? The confusion was almost unbearable. As the light dimmed and the noise faded, the robbers were starting to recover, their hands still trembling as they reached for their weapons. But they were no longer the threat. The real danger was something far more insidious. The mysterious man, the one who had been silently pulling the strings from the beginning, was now the center of attention. The robbers, realizing they were no longer in control, turned their attention back to him. But the tension in the room wasn't just between the robbers and the mysterious man anymore. It was between the man in the doorway and the man in the center of the room. Two forces now locked in an unseen battle. The robbers were just pawns. They were scared, confused, and struggling to make sense of what was happening. The woman's head spun. Who were these people? Why was this happening to her? She just wanted to live her life in peace. But it was clear now. There was something far greater at play. The dog, her body still tense, had never looked more ready. She growled softly, sensing that the game had changed. The woman's fingers curled into the armrest of her chair, her mind racing for answers, but she couldn't stop the fear from taking hold. The stakes were higher than she could ever have imagined, and the conflict was spiraling beyond anything she could have anticipated. She glanced at the two men, standing mere feet apart now, their eyes locked in a silent standoff, and then at the robbers, who were now backed into a corner, caught between the two forces. What would happen next? Would the robbers finally break? Would the mysterious man reveal his true intentions? And who was the figure in the doorway? Truly? The room seemed to close in on her, and all she could do was wait, knowing that the next few moments would decide everything. The room held its breath. The silence was suffocating, the tension palpable, as the two men stood locked in a silent war, their eyes locked in a fierce, unspoken challenge. The robbers, now clearly out of their depth, took a tentative step back, their weapons lowering slightly as they tried to make sense of what was happening. The newcomer in the doorway, the tactical figure, seemed to be waiting for something, though no one could tell what. The air felt electric with the threat of imminent violence, but there was an unnerving stillness to it as well. The mysterious man who had first intervened, the one who had seemed so calm and controlled, finally spoke. His voice was low, measured, and oddly detached, as though he were speaking to an old acquaintance rather than a room full of armed criminals. "You were never meant to make it this far," he said, his gaze still fixed on the tactical figure in the doorway. "But here we are." The woman felt a chill run down her spine. There was something about the way he said it that made her question everything she thought she knew. Was he involved with the robbers? Had he orchestrated the entire thing? She couldn't make sense of it, but the pieces were slowly starting to fall into place. The dog, ever watchful, growled again, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The woman couldn't tear her eyes away from the standoff. This was the moment, the one that would finally reveal the truth. The newcomer in the doorway didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for his side and pulled out a small device. With a soft click, the tension seemed to snap, and the room filled with a harsh, mechanical noise. The robbers flinched at the sound, instinctively reaching for their weapons again. But this time it was too late. The woman's heart raced as she saw the tactical figure press a button, and the once stable environment shifted. The lights in the room flickered, and for a moment, everything was bathed in an eerie red glow. The walls hummed, and the air seemed charged with something unnatural. The robbers hesitated, unsure whether they should stand their ground or retreat. It was as if they were being pulled into something much bigger than they had bargained for. "You think you're in control here?" The man in the center of the room finally asked, his tone sharper now. "You never were. None of you are." The newcomer gave a brief, almost imperceptible nod, and without warning, the sound of multiple footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. The robbers stiffened, fear creeping back into their expressions as they realized they were no longer in the driver's seat. They looked at each other, panic flooding their faces as they tried to process what was happening. And then the unthinkable happened. The door flew open with a burst of force, and a group of figures in uniform stormed into the room. But they weren't the police. They were a special unit, elite operatives, armed and ready for action. The woman's breath caught in her throat as she realized that the man in the center of the room wasn't just a random stranger. He was a part of something much larger. These men, the ones in uniform, had been waiting for the moment to make their move. The robbers, completely overwhelmed, dropped their weapons almost instinctively. They had no fight left in them. The woman watched in stunned silence as the operatives moved quickly to secure the area. It was clear now, this wasn't a simple robbery gone wrong. It was part of something deeper, something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The mysterious man, the one who had remained a shadow in the background, was at the center of it all. As the operatives subdued the robbers and secured the room, the woman felt her legs give out beneath her. She had been holding on for so long, and now that it was over, the adrenaline left her with a sense of emptiness. The dog nudged her gently, as though trying to reassure her. She managed a weak smile, grateful for the small comfort. One of the operatives, a tall woman with short dark hair, approached the mysterious man. She nodded respectfully, as if acknowledging his role in all of this. The woman could hardly believe what she was witnessing. This wasn't just about a robbery. It was about a network of people, a hidden operation that had been playing out right under her nose. As the chaos of the scene slowly died down, the mystery of the entire situation began to take shape. The tactical figure in the doorway, the one who had seemed so threatening, was now revealed to be a part of a secret operation, one that was keeping a watchful eye on dangerous criminals and corrupt organizations. The woman's home had been the setting for a much bigger game, one that involved the mysterious man and the group of operatives working together to stop a threat that no one had even realized was lurking so close to them. The woman turned to the man who had intervened, the one who had stood so calm and unmoving while everything around him erupted. Her voice was shaky, but she had to ask. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question hanging in the air between them. He met her gaze, his eyes softening for the first time. "I'm someone who's been watching over you," he said quietly. "And I'm not alone." The woman's mind swirled with disbelief. How long had this been going on? How much had been orchestrated behind the scenes? The truth was hard to accept, but it was undeniable now. She wasn't just a victim of a robbery. She had been caught in the crosshairs of something much bigger than herself. The operatives began to escort the robbers out, but the woman couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much more she didn't understand. She looked back at the man who had saved her life. He seemed to sense her lingering questions, and with a gentle smile, he offered her a simple answer. "Don't worry," he said. "You're safe now." But the woman couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't entirely gone. She had been part of a story much bigger than herself, and as the last of the robbers were led away, she couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The dog, ever watchful, sat beside her, and the woman felt a small sense of peace. The threat had passed, but the questions lingered. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone in facing it. As the woman watched the mysterious man walk away with the operatives, she couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. There was more to this story than anyone could imagine, and though the immediate danger had passed, something told her that the real adventure was just getting started.